So we're going to start with the ranged DPS specs. We're going to start with the Boomy. So actually, let me first go over how we're going to do this. So S tier is pretty much going to be like guaranteed meta. You're going to see the classes plural in this tier are literally they're locked in for every single dungeon next season. Okay, so but you can hazard a guess what's going in there. A+, I'm going to try and stick it to the classes that could potentially be in the meta. A is going to be very good classes, maybe potentially could have a spot in the meta in some dungeons or whatever it is, I don't know. B's like they're decent. C is like yikes. And then F is like where Org Evoker should be. So Boomy is looking very, very strong right now. It has got some incredible burst potential. It's also arguably got the best sustained AoE in the game, I would say. You've got some crazy burst potential for low keys as well. It doesn't perform or excel in low keys. It definitely performs much, much better in the higher keys. But with Pulsar and your Fury of Elune, if you do end up taking the Fury of Elune talent, it has that burst for those lower keys as well. That being said though, their tier set does make them that bit rampier. Like the 4 set builds up towards the end of your eclipses. So it is going to make you a little bit rampier, but that is not going to matter in those higher keys. It does incredible, incredible damage. Like you could easily be like very close to topping the meters, if not topping the meters. It's got some of the best utility that you can bring as well for Mythic Plus. You've got In-Cap Roar, you've got Stampeding Roar for some mobility for the rest of your group. You got Vortex, Typhoon, Nature's Vigil for off heals. You bring Mark of the Wild, which is maybe the best buff that you could bring for Mythic Plus. The list just goes on. You've even got, which we haven't used once this expansion, Trents or Treants to help out your tank. Probably not going to be the case, and you would lose DPS for it, but the option is there. You're also very tanky in Mythic Plus. You have Bart Skin on a short cooldown. You have Bear Form. I know Boomies are completely hating themselves for having to drop into Bear Form because you lose all your damage, but it is there if you need it for those big one-shot mechanics, especially on Tyrannical Weeks. Without further ado, let's go in an A+, okay? Boomy is definitely part of the possible meta composition for next season. Next, we have the BM Hunter, which got a lovely little under-the-radar rework to the talent tree, so now you don't have to put 3 points into Thrill of the Hunt or Dire Command, so you're freeing up those 2 extra talent points. We also got a massive rework to the right side of the tree with Call of the Wild, Savagery, and Master Handler, which just results in loads more DPS. The tier set is very, very strong, and it's passive as well, so you don't have to worry about it at all. Call of the Wild is going to give you a 2-minute bursty damage profile, especially if you talent into Bloody Frenzy under it, which is just going to be some disgusting AoE damage. You do have the ability to play different builds as well, so you could, for maybe a Tyrannical week, go for a Dire Pack Piercing Fangs build, or on an AoE week, you could go with a Bloody Frenzy and Piercing Fangs build, or Dire Pack. I don't know, I can't remember which was the eventual meta build for BM. But BM's just like great single target, amazing AoE damage, amazing sustained AoE damage. Not amazing in like the mid-sized packs with like 5 mobs maybe, which you're gonna see quite a bit of, so it could fall behind a little bit there. It's not that squishy anymore. Over the course of the expansion, we have had some survivability buffs, so we've got Rejuvenating Wind giving us more HP, we've got Fortitude of the Bear, Aspect of the Turtle, Survival of the Fittest, Feign Death to negate a lot of mechanics. Disengage actually removes a lot of dots as well, because a lot of them are tied to slows. So BM is going in the top of A tier. I don't think it's a possible meta spec, but I feel like it is very close to being up here. Next, we have the Marksmanship Hunter, who just got a massive rework to their tier set, and my god, was that a W. A huge, huge W. Marksmanship probably has some of the strongest burst in the game, I would say, especially in cleave scenarios. There's even builds opening up where you could take light ammo, so your trick shots cleaves to even more mobs, so that's going to help them with those bigger target dungeons, so like more mob density is what I was going for there. Tier set's great for single target and AoE with those rapid fire resets. Double tap is back, baby. So that's going to translate very well to just your overall damage as well. It's going to allow you, the 2 set is going to allow you to keep uptime on 2 target cleave as well, if you can, with your true shot. Just keeping up those volleys through your rapid fires. When I play MM, and I don't know if this is just a me angle, I feel a lot squishier than I do on BM or survival. You don't have the extra health from summoning a pet because you're using your lone wolf talent, and also because you don't have a pet, you lose a single target stun in intimidation, which is not ideal. So you have less CC and less utility than the other hunter specs. Not ideal, but yeah, I just feel a lot more squishier on MM in comparison to the other specs. I forgot to mention utility for BM, but we'll mention that for MM as well, because it's pretty much the same outside of not bringing that single target stun. You got binding shot to help out the tank if he does ever need to kite. Hunters as a class got a, we'll call it a raid buff going into next patch or next season. But Hunter's Mark is going to be somewhat valuable on tyrannical weeks, helping you take out those scary bosses a little bit easier. You've also got your freezing trap, which can be used as an interrupt. You can swap out your binding shot for scatter shot as another single target stop as well. So MM is going to go in the same tier as BM. I think it does more damage than BM, but I think BM just overall brings more to the group, and it's a little bit tankier as well. So I do think BM is slightly better. What you'll see, and I'm going to spoil where I'm going to put survival, I think all of the hunter specs are literally like next to each other in the A tier, and you could swap them out depending on the dungeon, depending on the comp, depending on how your tank pulls, etc, etc. So we're going to move on to augmentation evoker. You guessed it, this is going straight in the bloody S tier, maybe even an S plus tier. Probably deserves its own space, because this spec, it's not about the damage it brings, it's about the just insane amounts of utility and value that this spec brings to your group. Like, it just makes keys infinitely easier. It's been nerfed, but it is still an absolute monster, unfortunately. You're buffing your tanks, you're buffing your healers, you're buffing your DPS, obviously, but the main problem, is that the right word? The main value that you're bringing is arguably through your buffs to your tanks and healers, because your tanks becoming tankier, your healers getting more potent heals from the intellect that they're gaining, just making those top keys infinitely easier. You're gaining damage for the rest of your group by buffing up your DPS as well. They're getting verse. You bring infinite amounts of stops through your, is it upheaval? Yeah, not eruption, upheaval that knocks up. You've got your knock up with your Drakthir racial ability. You've got your knock back as well. You've got Zephyr, which you bring to your group, which can reduce incoming damage for your whole party on a 2-minute cooldown. You've got rescue, which also grants your whoever you're rescuing a 30% shield. It's quite tanky as well. You can use blistering scales on yourself if needed, because it does give you that absorb shield. But obviously, I'd recommend using it on your tank. You have a cheat death as well, which is huge. The fact that augmentation also gets a cheat death is disgusting. You bring off heals to your group. Like I said, it's not about the damage, it's about the utility that this brings to your group. It brings Bloodlust, which you'll later see is going to be very handy to slot into that meta composition. You've also got the Breath AoE stun, which I forgot to mention as well. So that's just another AoE stop. And obviously that is paired up with all of your damage cooldowns from the rest of your group. So if you have a mage combusting, when you use that breath, they're all going to be stunned, they're not going to move. All of those flame strikes are going to hit, and the flame patches. Big damage. Big augmentation evokers. Okay, that is a fair point. It's reliant on your party's performance, so it's not as strong in lower keys. But what I'm going to say is maybe if the rest of your party isn't using their cooldowns efficiently or where they should be, the aug might be buffing tank damage. Okay, so there it is. So next we'll move on to the Devastation Evoker, which obviously is unfortunately overshadowed by its stepbro or stepsis, the Augmentation Evoker. But Dev is actually really solid itself. It has lots of buffs recently, especially to its single target through Disintegrate. Unfortunately, proper CD management is kind of crucial, because all of your damage, or a lot of your damage, is pulled into your Dragon Rage windows. But those Dragon Rage windows are juicer. Like, Dev has some of the best upfront bursts in the game, and during those cooldowns, like, the burst is just incredible. However, the tier set is trying to, or sort of bridging the gap a bit just after your Dragon Rage cooldowns by giving you that extra damage that you get that ramps up towards the end of your Dragon Rage. And it's also giving you Essence Break procs. Essence Burst procs. I've been playing too much Demon Hunter. So it's going to give you damage just after your cooldown. So it is going to kind of bridge that gap a bit, but I would say a lot of its damage is still in your Dragon Rage windows. They've also got a very simple rotation, so you don't have to really think about it too much, which means you can focus on mechanics or what's going on around you, the dungeon, etc, etc, So I would argue you're slightly less likely to die because of that. You've got good mobility through your hover mechanic as well. You bring great util, much like the augmentation evoker does, slightly less, of course, but you do bring some great util as the evoker as well through your drag through abilities, knock up, knock back. You've got your oppressing roar, which can also be talented into an AoE soothe. You've got your Zephyr, which is going to reduce incoming damage for your party every 2 minutes if you were to press it on cooldown. You are one of the only classes that can dispel bleeds through Cauterizing Flame. I have been alarmed that, yes, Blessing of Protection can do the same, but obviously Cauterizing Flame is only on a 1 minute cooldown. You're relatively tanky. I wouldn't call Dev squishy anymore, but I don't think you're outright tanky. You've got 2 charges of hardened scales, you've got your Zephyr, you've got your rescue as well, you've got off heals. So Dev's just looking solid in general. Unfortunately, people don't really talk about it because of Org, but I think Dev is like, it's an A tier spec. I would say it's not as good as the Hunter specs, maybe like an A- for Dev, but it's still up there, okay? So next we'll move on to the Mage, and I'm still kind of like undecided where I'm going to put these specs, honestly, because they are all very, very good. Being like nitpicky, I don't know exactly where I'm going to put it. Frost Mage has a very, very good overall damage. Like, it's got great single target, it's got amazing burst AoE damage. Like, I've seen some stupid numbers on the PTR from Frost Mage on AoE. It's got a very strong prio damage and also funnel through your Frozen Orb resets. So that is a big W. You've got even better cleave going into next patch because your Glacial Spike is now going to shatter with your tier set, giving you extra cleave through that, so you're not just getting the 2 target cleave from the splitting ice. Frost is super tanky, or Mage is super tanky if played well in general, I think. Frost has access to double block, so that plays into its favor with that. It's also got the reset on your ice barrier as well, so that's big W. Ult time, if played well, is just like, it's amazing. You can save your healer so much healing by playing with your ult time correctly. You bring some of the best utility in the game, I would argue. You've got your Arcane Intellect, which is going to help out your Augmentation Evokers. It's going to help out your healers and any other casters in your group, including yourself, obviously. So you've got an AoE stop with Dragon's Breath, which is going to help you lock down those packs much, much better. You've got, I just hit my mic. As a Frost Mage, you've got your permanent slows on the mobs as well. So if your tank does ever need to kite, then you can help him with that. Something to add on top of that is Ring of Frost, which is going to help your tank kite, or just you group up mobs for like a coordinated pull. It's going to really help with that. And of course, with the rework, for some reason, mages in general got Mass Barrier to help out your group with any incoming damage. I think that's on a 2 minute cooldown, which is nuts. The fact that Mage got that is just disgusting. And you can always swap that out for Mass Invis. I don't feel like that will ever be played, but it is there if you need to skip for optimal routing or anything like that. So for that reason, Frost Mage, I think I've decided, is going A+ tier, along with its counterpart of Fire Mage. I think I'm going to place Fire Mage just in front of it. These 2 specs could honestly be swapped out. I mean, it's obviously the same class, so it's very easy to do that. But I think Fire Mage is just better in general. You've got consistent high burst damage for every single pack. You've got that bursty damage profile, which is amazing for Mythic Plus. If you needed to, I know it's the Flame Strike AoE burst that you do in your combustion rotations now, but you could funnel that into a prior mob. If it's a dangerous mob, you can just delete a mob off the face of the earth, which is like disgusting. Fire Mage also always scales really well with secondary stats, and with the new tier set, that is going to be the case even more so. So Fire's looking in a very, very, very good spot for Mythic Plus next season. I've seen lots of groups play with this on the PTR, and there's been some dungeons where I have not seen the Fire Mage under 500k DPS. They are just like disgusting next season. They are going to perform better in higher keys, because obviously the mobs have to live for their whole combust to get off all of their damage. Frost is going to be better in those lower keys and pushing up to maybe like a 25-ish maybe key, but Fire is still going to be able to perform very well. Yeah, Fire also has Cauterize as well. Frost has got the double block, Fire's got Cauterize, which is a cheat death, which is arguably more valuable too, because you don't even have to think about it. It just procs and it saves you, instead of having to reset with Cold Snap and then get your second ice block, hope that you still don't have your hypothermia debuff, and then press it again. So it just saves you without even having to think about it. Both of the Mage specs, or all of the Mage specs, bring Lust to your group as well. which is going to be nice, although not necessary because of the augmentation that is locked into every single bloody dungeon. Maybe fire could even be above Boomy. The reason I'm keeping Boomy there is Mark of the Wild, basically. Like, Boomy does amazing damage. Fire probably does a bit more, but Boomy's utility in general is just better. That's the thing with this tier, is like any of these specs could be in the possible meta comp. There's going to be one more spec that goes in here, and then in this tier here, it's going to be anything that could potentially fill that third spot. Adding on to fire, scaling nice with secondary stats, you stack verse as well, which makes you even tankier, which is again another W for the spec. Like, it adds to your damage, it's your best stat for damage, but it also is going to make you passively a lot tankier as well. So onto Arcane Mage then. We'll do Arcane Mage last out of the Mage specs, and it is last, in my opinion, out of the Mage specs for Mythic Plus. It definitely seems like the raid spec for Mage going into next season, because it can do arguably some of the best burst damage in the game, which does translate to Mythic Plus. It's kind of hard to execute it with all the mechanics and stuff like that going on during Mythic Plus. Mobs have to live long enough for your burst to actually ramp and go off as well. But regardless, it does amazing single target damage. It does amazing burst AoE damage as well. So that's a big W for the spec. Tier set giving you AoE missiles is nice for Mythic Plus, obviously, because you're getting that cleave, which is nice for dungeons. However, it seems sort of awkward to line up with your burn phases. And even if where you do, I've seen by the end of dungeons, it's not doing a great deal of damage. Like, I thought it would do some ridiculous amount of damage on your overall breakdown. But Arcane Missiles, I think I saw, was doing about like 10%, around 10%. So it's not actually like that huge, considering it cleaves. Again, tanky as a mage, you got your mirror images, you got your altered time, you got your ice block, you got your barrier, you got your mass barrier for your group as well. You bring in your arcane intellect to help out your group utility wise too. Mage just brings a lot to the group in general. I didn't realize this until recently when I started picking up the specs myself. I think I'm going to whack arcane in the top of A tier. I think good players can make this spec work and do a lot of damage. I don't think it's in the same ballpark as these two. But again, like the Hunter specs, all of the Mage specs seem quite close together. And they're all very, very good picks going into next season, that's for sure. I mean, that's the thing as well, is like, don't look too much into how they are placed within these tiers. Like I said, this A+ tier, any of these specs could be possibly meta. In this tier, Arcane, in my opinion, is better than Dev, but they're all in A tier, so they are very good picks for next season, and like, there's not going to be too much in it between them, right? Okay, so next we'll move on to the Elemental Shaman, which actually going into next season has got one of the better tier sets damage-wise. It's super fun as well. Unfortunately, they did kind of gut the spec recently. They did a lot of bug fixes, rightly so. I'm not arguing against that, but they haven't buffed it in accordance to the detriment of its damage. Did that even make sense? I don't know, but you guys know exactly what I meant, okay? The tier set is going to give you that cleave, that passive cleave damage. It's also going to give you a bit of extra prio damage as well through your elemental blast and also the molten slag debuff it applies. I think that's what it's called. Basically the lava burst debuff that it applies as well. And this is also going to make you infinitely more mobile, which is then going to increase your damage passively as well, because you're not going to be stopped by any mechanics. It's all looking good for elemental in that front. I think elemental, numbers wise, has one of the best tier sets going into next season. I think it is a massive increase to their damage. However, it needs a massive buff to their spenders. Earthshock, not necessarily, because the single target from elemental for next season is actually looking quite strong. But the mass AoE, because Earthquake is basically just like tickling mobs, it's struggling on mass AoE. It's good at cleave because of the lava burst cleave, but the AoE is not there because Earthquake definitely needs a buff. Elemental Shaman is great utility as well. You've got your knockdowns from your Earthquakes, which I feel like is always kind of slept on. I feel like people don't really emphasize how strong that is. You've got your knock up from your Thundershock. If you do talent into that, you've got an AoE stop with your Cap Totem. You have the shortest kick in the game. You bring amazing other utility through your Ancestral Guidance is the big one. Some mega off heals with Ancestral Guidance when your group needs it most. You bring Lust to the group. Again, not that relevant for this season if Org stays how it is. You have your Earth Ellie as well to help out with tanks, but don't do that on a Sanguine week. And the biggest detriment to the Elemental Shaman and the Shaman in general, as we all know, is how squishy it is. You've got your Astral Shift, which is a very strong cooldown, but it's slightly too long. And outside of that, you have nothing. You have off heals, you've got your Ancestral Guidance like I mentioned, you've got a very minimal health percentage gain from your Earth Elemental, but other than that, you're just praying that you don't get one shot and hoping your healer can baby you. So for that reason, Ellie is going in the B tier. It's not looking amazing. If it did get buffs to its Earthquake or its Spenders in general, then it could see it pushing up maybe into the bottom of A, but it's just the lack of defensives that it struggles with. I am going to contradict that later with enhancement, but yeah. Outside mass AoE, very great, but its impulse less than 5, which is not good. The other problem that Ellie struggles with is if the tank does need to kite, or if you need to move the mobs for any reason, you're going to lose a lot of damage from your Earthquake as well, even if it was doing damage. We move on to the Warlock specs. So we'll start with Affliction, which has, next season, got much more frequent burst, and is better at single target and also light cleave thanks to the tier set. It's also a monster in mass AoE. Affliction Warlock is a monster in mass AoE. Like, it's always kind of been overshadowed, I think, by Destro, and also it's lacking single target that AF does struggle with, because you either have to talent heavy into AoE or single target. Tier set's kind of helping with that, but yeah, the community perception because of that is not great for the Affliction lock. But yeah, in mass AoE, it can definitely shine. And next season, there seems to be quite a lot of mass AoE. Obviously, being a Warlock, very tanky. You've got your Dark Pact, you've got your Unending Resolve, you've got passive absorbs as well. So tank survivability wise for the Warlocks, that is not an issue at all. You've got Health Stones, which is also going to feed nicely into the utility department. Health Stones for your group is going to help out your whole group with survivability in general. You've got your Demonic Gateways, not that valuable in Mythic Plus, but it can be used for some skips. You've got your Ritual of Summoning, which I'm just going to mention, but it's not really going to play in its favor because it's so niche, but it has been used before. Affliction Warlock going to put in the top of B tier, I think, for now. I think it's a slightly better than Elemental. People might meme on that, but that's just the bad community perception that Affliction Warlock has. It's actually looking quite decent for next patch. Unlike its counterpart, Destruction Warlock. Destruction is having a bad time next season. It's probably got the worst tier set going into next season, especially for Mythic Plus. It's not looking ideal. It still will do like half decent on big pools, especially in their infernal cooldown windows. It's going to do a lot of damage during those, but once again, the mobs have to be stacked inside their Rain of Fire, and it is very reliant on their cooldowns as well. So yeah, Destroy's just not doing a lot of damage next season. It's reliant on cooldowns. It's reliant on how your tank or group pulls. It's very reliant on CD management. It's not great at cleave damage. So like pools of like maybe 5 to 8 mobs where you're going to be pulling that amount of mobs a lot with pugs. So it's not going to be great in a pug environment. It is quite easy to play, so in those high keys, if you can get the ramp damage off and also the tank keeps them in your Rain of Fire, you can focus on mechanics, and it's not really going to take your focus too much, so you can focus on those and probably live more in turn from that. But yeah, Destro, just don't play it next season. Blizzard, buff it. Don't buff it too much. Thank you. Ooh, where am I? I don't actually know where I'm going to put them. Demo is definitely the strongest of the Warlock specs going into next tier. I don't think it's too much stronger than no, it's definitely stronger than Affliction, but not by miles. It's got really good cleave damage, especially through the tier set. Those Doom Bolt volleys are not hitting how they used to hit, because they used to absolutely truck, and Demo would have probably been S tier. They did get nerfed, but it's still doing a lot of damage. It's great for Mythic Plus because you're getting that cleave from your tier set as well. They are relatively rampy, so they are going to perform better in high keys because it's going to take you a while to actually get your damage like chugging and going along in those lower keys. So they might struggle a bit in those lower keys. Unfortunate for them. But yeah, Demo is looking the best out of the lock specs. It's got good single target damage as well. Decent mass AoE too. I think... Chat, where am I going to put this? I'm deciding right now, high B, top of B, or low A tier. Like, Warlock's really not looking amazing for next season for Mythic Plus. Destro is too high, needs to be F tier. Everybody's dooming on Destro, and I'm not arguing that it's not a bad spec, because it is a terrible spec going into next patch. But in those high keys, Destro is going to be fine, I think. It just takes a while to get the damage going, but yeah, it does. It can do good damage, especially in a coordinated group. I'm going to put Demo Lock in the bottom of A tier for now. I think it could be argued that it's top of B tier as well, but I do want to highlight that it is like decently better than Affliction Warlock. So yeah, bottom of A tier for the Demonology Warlock. Okay, finally, for the range specs, last but not least, is the Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest is doomed. They got multiple nerfs, which they rightly so deserved because they were part of the God Comp last season. PI's been nerfed, Master Spell's been nerfed. It's not looking great for them. Although the PI nerf isn't going to be massive. They shouldn't have nerfed Master Spell, but that's a conversation for a different day. Shadow Priest has got amazing execute damage going into next season thanks to the tier set, but kind of mid damage outside of this, I would argue. It doesn't excel anywhere. It has great priority damage. It's the only thing I can say. That is definitely a valuable damage profile for Mythic Plus. Even though the Master Spell and PI did get nerfed, it still does bring very good utility to the group. You've got your Power Word Fortitude, which is really nice for those high keys. You've got your Vampiric Embrace as well for off heals. Like I said, PI really didn't get that much of a nerf. It hasn't got a great kick, as in like the kick timer is very long, so that is not great for Mythic Plus either. Doesn't really bode itself well to dungeon settings. Okay, so Shadow Priest, we're going to put in the bottom of C tier. It's not looking great for the spec next season. They've had their time in the sun. It's time for them to settle down a bit. They're going in the bottom of C, all right? So that is the range specs ranked overall. We've got Augmentation, shocker, in S tier, completely dominating the scene. All of these specs right here could be possible meta, and even arguably Arcane and BM Hunter. Shadow Priest and Destro Lock, it's not your time. Maybe next season, buddy. Maybe in the War Within. Maybe.